everyone. It's great to be here today. So today's new connected cars are able to interact with the world around them and with other cloud-based systems using IoT innovations such as proximity sensors and predictive intelligence. For example, certain Mercedes-Benz cars introduced this year can link directly to Nest using the which is an IoT-powered smart home, to remotely activate a home's temperature controls prior to arrival. So I guess on that note, I'll start with you, Doug. How far do you think the connectivity can go?
Well, I mean, I think eventually all cars will of course be connected, and I think your phone certainly needs to be better integrated to your car connected to the cloud, your car connected then to the broader Internet of Things.
And how will the UI, the user interface in the car evolve, do you think?
Well, that's certainly something we care a lot about, and I guess it's self-serving in a way, but I think the experience of using your phone in the car, first of all, leaves a lot to be desired, and some of the user interfaces that are in the car itself, that are built into the car, leave a lot to be desired. In some cases, I feel like I'm using a UI from the '80s, but imagine as a way to make the driving experience more seamless and to integrate your phone into that experience. Imagine if the information from your phone was projected as an image that appeared to float outside of your car's windshield, and then imagine if you could interact with that information using touchless gestures, so that it's a completely eyes forward experience, and making that as seamless as possible and as low intervention as possible, so that you can really stay focused on driving, but at the same time accomplish the things that you would like to accomplish and have the kinds of interactions with your phone that you'd like to have.
And Marianne, I'm going to move on to you now. I think you're also very interested in the whole UI interface. And kind of moving on from what Doug was talking about there, how do you prevent drivers from being distracted? As he says, when things come up, if you're, passing a castle and you ask the car to give you more information about that castle, and then it brings up a lot of information about it, how do you prevent the driver being distracted?
Well, I think it's clear that to have the kind of rich level of interaction that we're talking about, that may not be something that the driver, unless you're in a self-driving car, would be able to access. And I think it should be contextual, right? If you're driving your car, if you pass by that castle, and all this information, comes into the automobile, that's fantastic, but maybe that's not, for the driver himself or herself. But I think I wanted to touch on this sort of the outside in, because that's something that I think is, when we talk about the car, sometimes we talk about it, as sort of it's the bubble that we sit inside, but that bubble is moving through space, and it's very easy to know where that bubble is, and it's really easy to sort of bring in the kind of the context of what is happening outside into the car that could be quite interesting for the people actually sitting in the car. And then Doug talked about touchless gesture. That's something my company Oblong Industries, we have a long history of gestural interaction, and one of the wonderful things about a car is that it's a constrained space, right? Like, we're sitting. Generally in a car today, you don't move very much. And that's really helpful from a math perspective, because then your hands are here, and sort of so tracking the gestures in a car is something that is a lot easier to do than if you're talking about a free space. Like, if we were trying to track our hands on this stage, that would be a challenge. But if we're trying to track our hands and we're seated here as we would be in a car, it's a lot easier. So it makes I think it makes touchless gesture much more achievable in the car than outside.
And Michael, that's something your company is doing right now, Leap Motion. They're very involved in hands-free gesture movements. So can you give us some examples of how that would work in the car? But also, I know that you believe that buttons are also great at times.
Yeah, so it's a little controversial because we are, as you said, a motion and gesture company, but I think a lot of the gestures that are implemented in cars right now are pretty stupid. And I think particularly anything that tries to mimic something that can just be done better through a button, but is being done through a gesture because it seems cool, is pretty doomed to fail and falls in that stupid category. So, for example, raising the volume, decreasing the volume, doing anything you can do from a button on your steering wheel with a gesture you have to learn, like this or something, that's not a good experience. And unfortunately, way too many OEMs are just trying to put gesture control in things because it's what everyone else is doing and it seems cool. But unsurprisingly, I do think that motion has a place in cars, and I think that that place is biggest with things like heads-up displays, like they were talking about earlier, where the driver with their hands on the steering wheel is using motions in space to interact with the heads-up display. And I think that that best calls for fluid direct interaction. And also in general, motion and gestures are often best at interacting with new things as opposed to things that have existed for decades. So in the way that things like volume up and down have existed for a long time, AC like settings have existed for a long time, they fall in the stupid category, but whereas what content, how you interact with it in a HUD is totally new, it falls in the can be built so that it's really novel and very powerful and requires something like motion. So that's how we think about that dichotomy.
Okay. And Doug, we have been hearing about connected cars for some time now, and we've been hearing a lot about driverless cars as well, but they're still not mainstream and we still don't have them. How long will it take before we get them, do you think? And when will it be that everyone has one?
Yeah. Well, I think it's going to be a while, right? So I guess depending upon which analyst you believe, I think it's something like 20 years from now, maybe 10% of new cars sold will be self-driving cars. Maybe Tesla thinks that it will happen faster, and they could be right. But one of the big challenges with making it really mainstream is just the upgrade cycle is very, very long. I mean, there's a couple billion cars and trucks existing in the world, and there's 100 million new cars sold per year. So, even if every new car built tomorrow was a self-driving car, it would still take 20 years just to replace, the installed base of cars and trucks. So, and that's certainly one of the things we think about a lot in terms of letting people upgrade the cars that they have, since car ownership is also lasting for an extended period of time, as a way to kind of leapfrog and be able to innovate faster, and sort of get around that long upgrade cycle.
Mary, if you're in control of a car and there's driver error, that's one thing. But if you're in control of a car and there's machine error, that's quite another. Do you think people will trust connected cars enough to give up control on collision avoidance?
I would say that that's something that, as a driver and as a user of any new technology, you have to learn to trust it. Today, would I trust it? I live in Los Angeles. It's kind of crazy. I would love a driverless car because I'm tired of driving on LA freeways. But would I trust a driverless car today on LA freeways? Probably not. Would I trust a driverless car more if I was on the I-5, for example, between Los Angeles and San Francisco, where you sit for hours and you sit in a lane and you don't move and you drive at a constant speed and there are very few sort of distractions or other things happening around you? I would trust a driverless car much more in that circumstance than I would in the kind of hyper-congested urban areas that a lot of us drive in.
And staying with the subject of trust, Michael, do you think connecting your car, that has huge impacts on privacy and who owns the data? And it's, we've seen examples of cars being hacked. Do you think that's a big concern?
I definitely think it's dangerous, but I think that danger sort of comes with any new technology. So I think it's inevitable. The reality is today there is very little meaningful privacy, and people aren't complaining, or at least it's not stopping them from getting a phone. So everyone's driving around with a connected phone in their pocket that's transmitting just as much information as their connected car that could be and is often subpoenaed and is being tracked by the carrier and by whoever owns the OS. And so practically, I don't think it matters as much. But I think the issue of trust is interesting in other ways too. And I think it's less about the data because I think that doesn't matter as much in this world where everything's being tracked all the time. But it's about how cars change in a world where they're mostly self-driving, and I really believe that for a long time the car is not going to have no steering wheel at all. There's going to be an intermediary period where there's a steering wheel and you're expected to take over, and that's going to last for years. Like none of the companies that are working on self-driving cars are working on them with no steering wheel at all. So what does interaction look like in that world? I think it probably is something like a heads-up display that the user is looking at the road through and is controlling with their hands just a few inches above the wheel, so that instead of being distracted and on your phone when the car says, oh, take over, you're in a position to actually take over. But we can also add value because having a giant HUD is a good experience. So it's net value add, and it's also safer and less distracting. I think that'll be an important part of the trust dynamic. I don't think people will trust a car that is totally self-driving, doesn't have a steering wheel, but I think for many years prior to that, you'll have cars that have a steering wheel, and that's an important part of the trust dynamic.
And staying with you, Michael, what do you think are the legalities? Who will be responsible in a crash with a driverless car? Will it be the manufacturer of the car? Will it be the developer of the software? Will it be the owner of the car? And how will that be decided?
Yeah, I obviously not a legal expert, but it seems like it's moving in the direction of it being the manufacturer. But I think, again, the distinction I was just talking about is probably very important. I think it will be the manufacturer maybe in 5 or 10 years, maybe 10 years when the cars are truly autonomous, and what it means to have a car is completely different. It seems unlikely that in a world where all cars are autonomous, that the concept of being a driver will even be the same, because there isn't really that much reason to own a car. There's certainly not going to be any fun related to driving or experience related to driving. So I think a lot of people believe that in that future, the autonomous cars also look a lot more like taxis or Ubers, and you're summoning a car to you. Since you don't have control over that car, liability for you personally probably will be unlikely. But in that intervening period where you have cars that can change lanes and can avoid collisions and can do 99% of the things, but you're still expected to take over. Clearly, in that situation, that's a more conventional liability structure. And that also goes to why I think it's important to find ways to balance people being able to occupy themselves productively for the 99% of the time they're not driving the car, but also being able to take over when they're expected to, when the car fails, because this is new technology. And there are a million different permutations of roads and people, and even though it's being tested for years, it's not going to be truly 100% robust. I think anything you test long enough, as anyone in software or hardware knows, the moment it gets out there to the user, it immediately breaks. So you don't want that with a car. So there's going to be a steering wheel for a while.
Okay. And connected cars, Mary, are opening new realms of monetization for car makers, service providers, and many other travel-related industries. And data plans will account for a portion of those revenues and represent a new source of income for telcos. Can you kind of tell us a bit more about kind of the various monetization streams for connected cars and how they can be brought about?
Well, the issue of monetization, I think, because in order for there to be something to monetize, there has to be something for the folks inside the car to be consuming. And in order for the folks to be consuming, there has to be sort of a universe of applications or content that that these folks are consuming, that they're using, and that raises, I think, a specter that if we're talking about cars as computers, which, if you hear Elon Musk, that's how he's talking about, the new Tesla models, is that it's a computer on wheels. And that's, I think, absolutely the direction that we're all going. But OEMs today, the car manufacturers, they have very different footprints, right? There isn't this notion of kind of common platform. And so therefore, if you want a whole ecosystem of applications that are going to be focused, at the car industry, there needs to be an effort to make sure that those apps that you don't have developers building apps for Audi and Mercedes and Ford and the different OEMs, and similarly, that these apps should work internationally, for example, right? Because I lived in Europe for many years, and I had a Volvo, good European car. I wanted to bring it to the United States, and impossible, right? And so I think that we need to set up the infrastructure for there to be sort of a common platform for publication of these things that people are going to be consuming in cars to get to those streams of monetization. So I don't think that the monetization streams will be much different than what we see kind of outside of a car, but having those monetization streams like work inside the car, having the car activate them, will depend on sort of how well sort of the whole ecosystems plays together.
So right now, basically, the main challenge facing connected cars is that there isn't one infrastructure there, and that needs to be developed. So apps will be working with every car, basically. Yeah. And Doug, on that note, do we really need connected cars? There's a lot of cool things they offer, but do we really need them? And even right now, a lot of people aren't using a lot of connected things available in cars, such as touch or hands-free gestures, and not that many people are driving electric cars either.
Sure, I believe we do. So I mean, once cars are connected, if you imagine all cars are connected, then you can start to solve some of the real pain points that still frustrate drivers every day, like traffic and congestion and finding a parking spot and paying for that parking spot. So if all cars are connected, then smart routing is possible, and making a meaningful reduction in traffic and congestion is possible, and making it really easy for me to find a parking spot and pay for that parking spot. So I think there's a world of possibilities that are enabled through connected cars, and it's not about apps that are fun, but it's about making the driving experience great, and addressing the pain points that we all live with. And I agree that for that to happen, all cars have to be connected. There has to be a common platform for developers to innovate on top of, and there has to be a user interface that allows me to do these things in a way that's kind of low intervention, a lot of intelligence in the system, so it proactively knows that I'm going to run out of fuel, within the next 15 kilometers, and I'm not going to make it to my destination. Therefore, I do need a fuel stop added to my trip. So making those things low intervention, seamless, a great part of the experience, and something that's not distracted. I would put that all as part of connected car.
And as well as the one common infrastructure and the legalities involved, what do you think are the other challenges facing connectivity, like connected cars and our move towards them?
Yeah, I do think data privacy is a big issue, and I do think that kind of gets back to monetization, in that there is a tremendous amount of data that's generated by the car. And that data does have value to insurance companies, to city planners, to car companies themselves, but there's still open questions about who owns that data, and what rights do the consumers have, and how do they sort of opt into that data being shared with various third parties, and how do they get visibility into that. So I think those, much like the monetization, a lot of those issues are not unique to the car. So they'll be flushed out in the same way they are in general. But I still think that's in the minds of some automotive makers, they own the data and the consumer doesn't. So I think there's still issues to be worked out.
I can see we're slowly coming to an end here, nearly done, but I just want to kind of ask each of you the same question, and that is, obviously you're all involved in companies to do with connected cars and connectivity. What is it about connected cars that excites you the most, like coming down the line? What do you think is the biggest thing that you're most interested in?
Yeah, sure. For us, it's really making the in-car experience great.
Mary? Or what do you look forward to with connected cars?
I guess I would look, the future that I would love to see is a future where the connectivity or sort of the interactions in the car are truly beautiful. I think there's a lot of beauty that's missing from, we focus on activating certain features, but we spend a lot of time in our cars, and so our way of interacting with the sort of our data and computation in the car, it should be it should give us agency. It should we should be able to control things, and it should be beautiful because we're going to spend a lot of time in there.
And Michael, what do you most look forward to?
Yeah, a modern car is more powerful than a supercomputer was 20 years ago, just like anything that has a modern processor. So there's all this untapped potential, and the ways that we interact with it right now are up, down, left, right with buttons and such. And like I said earlier, that's a great way to do simple things. But what I'm excited about is a world where we have massive high-res heads-up displays in the car, and we're interacting with them with natural movements that are very physical and that anyone can use. And I think that will be a key part of turning the car from a passive experience into a really beautiful, powerful, engaged experience where people can tap into all of that computing power.
Do you think ultimately people will enjoy being in their car, stuck in traffic for hours, so they can get a lot done and their car will do a lot of things for them, be it checking them into a hotel if they're on their way to a hotel, or telling them what's wrong with their car? If the red light's flashing up, that the car will say what's wrong?
Yeah, absolutely. I think being in a car doesn't have to be a bad experience. And in the very short term, that means as the car becomes more pseudo-autonomous, but you're at the wheel, what is the experience like there? And that's what I think is about turning your huge screen in front of you into a transparent HUD and letting you interact with it. And then eventually, it's a question about what is being in a truly autonomous car like. And there, obviously, you can be even more engaged. But in all of those situations, making a really beautiful interface that lets you use powerful computers that are in there to do productive things, to entertain yourself, that's key to making it something more than a car, more than a tool. And I think it can be so much more than that.
Okay, well, we've come to the end, so I just want to say thanks very much to Michael, Mary, and Doug. I'm certainly very excited by the prospect of being able to be driven around and not have to worry about parking or traffic or anything like that. Thank you.
Thank you.